Hi, welcome to Let's Talk Gardening. I'm Norma Samuel with the University of Florida Institute of Food and Agriculture Sciences, UF-IFAS Extension in Sumter County. Today's episode, we'll be talking about fall vegetable gardening. And yes, it's that time of year to get your fall vegetable garden in the ground. First, I'd like to get you familiar with the U.S. Department of Agriculture Plant Hardiness Zone Map. This is important for you as a gardener to know where you're located in the state with regards to the hardiness zone. And what this tells you is the average annual extreme minimum temperature for your area. In Sumter County, where my office is located, we are in zone 9A and 9B. That means that our average annual extreme minimum temperature ranges between 20 and 30 degrees Fahrenheit. I've included the USDA Plant Hardiness Zone Map website here for you, and you can actually visit this website, insert your zip code, and you'll be able to find what your plant hardiness zone is. A very useful publication for you to become familiar with is the Florida Vegetable Gardening Guide. And this is what I call the mini Bible of vegetable gardening. And it is something that is useful for the beginning gardener and expert gardeners like myself. And believe you me, I refer to this publication all the time. The University of Florida researchers have made this a very simple publication that gives you information from planting all the way to harvesting. I highly recommend you find this publication and refer to it on a regular basis. On page 6 and 7, the part that I refer to all the time is the planting dates. And it has those divided according to where you're located in the state. So North, Central, and South Florida. And it gives you planting date by crop, and it also gives you information on the expected yield, number of plants that you should put per 10-foot area. It gives you information on the days to harvest, and it even gives you information on the seeding depth. So certainly refer to this on a regular basis when you are planning to put your garden in. What are your planting options? The sky is the limit. You do not need a lot of space to do a vegetable garden. The two criteria that must be met though is that you need to have 6 to 8 hours of full sun, and you need to have your garden located close to a water source. If you're planting anything that flowers, such as your tomatoes and zucchinis, they're gonna need that 6 to 8 hours of full sun. Anything that you're growing for the leaf, for example, lettuce or mustard, you can get away with 5 to 6 hours of sun and still get a good production. If you have a small space, certainly consider using containers. So you can have your containers directly on the ground, or you can use, go upwards. And for my backyard, I developed this system. My husband and I have this system where we use 5-gallon buckets, and we plant in the top of the buckets, we have squash or cucumbers, and below we have tomatoes. And we have demonstrated how to use this system in an earlier episode. So certainly revisit those episodes and learn how to do this. In terms of watering, you can use micro irrigation, and that's highly recommended. It's the most efficient way of watering. If you cannot afford to put a micro irrigation system in, certainly you can use just a regular overhead sprinkler, or you can hand water. When you're watering, make sure you're watering early in the day so your plants have time to dry off. If you're watering late at night, you're sending your plants to bed wet, and you will have problems with fungal diseases. In real estate, they say location, location, location. In gardening, we say soil test, soil test, soil test. And it's important because if you have a good foundation with regards to the soil, you're setting yourself up for success. So if you do a soil test, you're able to find out the pH, how acid or alkaline the soil is. And most plants are going to do well between pH 5.8 to 6.5. You also get to know what nutrients are in the soil. And that is critical, because if you know what nutrients are in the soil, then you're putting out fertilizer according to recommendations, and you're not over fertilizing. When you over fertilize, then you have potential to burn your plants, and you also have the potential to pollute our waterways, and you don't want to be a polluter. So I highly recommend you take a soil test. When to fertilize. So for my vegetable garden, I usually start off by broadcasting and incorporating fertilizer at planting. So I broadcast that fertilizer first, and then I get my plants in the ground. If you did not do a soil test, the general recommendation is to use 1 pound of a complete or balanced fertilizer, such as 10-10-10. And those numbers stand for nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium in that order. And you're using that at 1 pound per 100 square feet or per 100 foot of row. You can also use an organic product such as blood meal, and that is 15-1-1, and apply that at 3 1/3 pounds per 1,000 square foot area. This balanced fertilizer, we recommend that you come back and side dress on sandy soils every 3 to 4 weeks. If you have a soil that's high in organic matter, or you have clay soils, those hold the nutrients a lot longer. So you can come back and side dress every 4 to 6 weeks or so. In Florida, we recommend that we have a 2% phosphorus rule for lawns. That does not apply for vegetable gardening. So keep that in mind. Now let's talk about a few crops that you can put in now. This list is by no means extensive, but I'm just going to touch on a few. Definitely refer to the vegetable gardening guide to find out some of the things that you can, or I should say all of the things that you can get in the ground now. So let's talk about summer squash. And your summer squash are like your zucchini and your yellow crookneck squash. And these are squash that do not last or store for a long time. You may hear the term winter squash, and the winter squash are those that can store for an extended period of time, like your butternuts and your pumpkins. Now is the time for you to get zucchinis and your yellow squash in the ground. When you have these crops, note that they send out a batch of male flowers followed by a batch of female flowers, and then both coming out at the same time. How do you differentiate between the flowers? If you look at this photo here, you can see the male flower just has a stalk and then the petals. So you see This flower that I'm pointing at here, that's a male flower. The female flower, on the other hand, has an immature squash followed by the petals at the blossom end. In order for this miniature squash to develop into a fruit that you can eat, you need to have, pollination taking place. So you need pollen going from the male flower to the female flower, and water is very critical in that process in order for fertilization of the ovules to take place and that fruit developing into something that you can eat. So from time to time, you will notice that you have squash that are there, but they fall off, and that's because they didn't get fertilized, or they may have the bottom end shrivel, and that's because fertilization didn't take place completely, and that squash will not develop into something that you can eat. Yellow crookneck squash is really not my favorite to grow because to me, they don't get too big and they turn old very quickly. So in this photo that you see here, that's a yellow squash that's way past its prime and it's too old for you to harvest at that point. Varieties that you can grow for zucchini, black or elite are two good varieties, and for the yellow squash are your early summer or yellow crookneck squash are two good ones. You are just in the nick of time when it comes to planting tomatoes. I do recommend you get your tomatoes in the ground now. Go out and purchase healthy seedlings and get them in the ground. Look for varieties that have the initials VFN. Those letters stand for verticillium wilt, fusarium wilt, and nematode resistance. It doesn't mean that the tomatoes will not get that particular disease. It means that if they do get it, they are tolerant to it. So you'll still get a good production even though they may have the disease. Some varieties to consider, early girl, big beef, celebrity. If you're looking specifically for heirloom varieties, you can get Black Prince or Black Frontula. The options for tomato varieties, the sky is the limit. So find varieties that you do like. Let's talk quickly about cool season crops. And these are mostly your brassicas, collards, cauliflower, cabbage. These are some that fall within that family. If you like collards, you can put your collard seedlings in the ground now because collards can tolerate some heat. Another cool season crop that you can plant now is Swiss chard, and that also can tolerate some heat. We're still having temperatures that are in the 90s, so I prefer not to put cabbage, cauliflower, and broccoli in at this time. Around this time of year, what I do instead is get seedlings started. So I would be planting those seeds in the trays, and in about 6 to 8 weeks, my seedlings will be ready to get them in the ground. Your collards and Swiss chard, their flavor tends to be a lot better during the cool season. However, they can tolerate the heat, as I said. When you're harvesting your collards and also your Swiss chard and mustard, we recommend harvesting the lower leaves, and that will allow you to have continued production over a long period of time. So do not go in and take the whole plant out at once, but just harvest the lower leaves. Another thing I like to recommend is staggering your planting. And because we have such a wide window in which we can plant these crops, certainly plant some maybe every 2 weeks or every month. And that way you do not have a glut of cabbage or cauliflower, and then, you don't know what to do with them. So definitely stagger your planting so you're extending the time period in which you're able to harvest. With your cauliflower, you can do a process that we call blanching to protect the head, and that's where you're bringing the leaves closer, that are closer to the head, over the head, and tying them to protect the head. There are some varieties such as Snowball that is, self-blanching, so the leaves naturally grow, over the head. The main problem that you'll come across with these crops are caterpillars. It's important for you to know the different stages of caterpillars, what insects in the garden are good, which ones are bad. When you go out in the garden, scout your crops so that you know if you have any of those bad pests in the garden, and you can crush the eggs or crush the caterpillars when you see them. Armyworms will take over your crop in no time, so definitely be on the lookout for caterpillars. Another problem that affects this group of crops is black rot of brassicas. If you do have this disease, or if you do get this disease, you'll need to rotate to another crop the next season, because this disease, the pathogen, stays around for at least 3 years. And how do you know you have black rot? It's definitely one of those diseases that you can tell when you have it, because you have a characteristic V-shaped yellowing on the edge of the leaves. We do have lots of publication available on the caterpillars and diseases that you'll come across, but you can certainly have a good crop if you're planting and following the recommended guidelines of the university. So if you have any questions at all, please do not hesitate to contact me. And thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Let's Talk Gardening. I'm Norma Samuel with the University of Florida Institute of Food and Agriculture Sciences, UF-IFAS Extension in Sumter County.